So hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. We're going to wait a couple of minutes just to give people a chance to join and trickle in. We've had 192 signups today, so I imagine we'll have a couple of people who are arriving slightly late, and we'll aim to start in earnest about 2 minutes past. Just in case you'd like to get familiar with Teams, at the top there is a Q&A function. If you go to the top banner on your screen and then more or less in the center, there's a chat and a Q&A function. This is what we'll use to submit any questions that we'll read out for the team at the end of today's webinar. And feel free while you're waiting in the chat, put who you are, where you're joining from, and your organisation. Just nice to familiarise yourself with who's here as well. Perfect. So we'll make a bit of a start. I'm sure we'll get more people trickling in as we go. We'll start with a bit of introductions. So first of all, hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ben. I'm a project coordinator at Community Energy Pathways. I'm going to be handling the nitty-gritty of today's webinar, hopefully keeping everybody on track and monitoring the Q&A. This is our agenda today. So we're going to start with this welcome. We'll have an introduction to CEP and the importance of social value for the community energy sector. That will be from Ollie Pendered from CEP. Next, we'll hand over to Matt Vickers from Community Energy England, who will give a bit of an introduction to CEE and why this work is important for them. Next, we'll go to Caroline Bird of the University of Bristol, and she's going to talk us through social value concepts and the social returns on investment, particularly as it pertains to decision making. And then finally, Colin Nolden is going to talk to us about the VALCOM project and outline the research questions we're trying to ask with our survey today. Just a few bits of housekeeping before I hand over to our other presenters. This webinar is being recorded and we will circulate this afterwards. That does include the chat and the Q&A as well, so that will all be included in the follow-up for this session. If you haven't already found it, the Q&A is at the top, more or less in the center next to the chat item. Here is where you can submit questions for our speakers. At the end, we will try and cover as many of these as possible. If previous questions you think are particularly pertinent, you can upvote them in the little box that they appear in. At the bottom left, there is a little upwards facing arrow that you can use to vote up that question. So we'll aim to answer the top voted questions at the end of today's session. Finally, if you decide you'd like to mute the chat, if you open the chat tab, once it's selected and you go to the more options at the top of the banner, you are able to mute the chat there. That's up to you and absolutely fine if you choose to do so. Perfect. So now that all that's out of the way, I am going to start by handing over to Ollie Pendered, who is the Executive Chair here at Community Energy Pathways.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ben, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. Great to see one more person joins. We've got 100 people on the call, so we're there for a century. Community energy is growing, and the energy market at the moment is fascinating. It's got all sorts of moving parts, and Community Energy Pathways, we take a lot of time to help everyone, community energy groups, sort of grow and expand and participate in the future of energy. Social value has become more and more of a key part of both sort of reporting, the reporting that we do within the sector to funders, but also in procurement, and how the social side of what the community energy sector is recognised by procurement from local authorities and major funders. And uh, this feels like a really sort of top milestone to be arriving at, sort of after a year and a half. Pathways, we've been working with a number of groups across the England, looking at measuring social value, and we've come back to today and this presentation with academics Colin Nolden, with Caroline, and with Jake, supported by Ben. So it feels like a really important time. I'll just move on the slide. Thanks, Ben. So in all, just a little bit about community energy pathways. In all, currently we're supporting over 50 community energy groups. The majority of them are in the southeast, but we work alongside 15 local authorities at the moment, and sort of building that bridge between community energy groups to work with their local authorities to really deliver on a local level. The energy advice programs that we run, reaching around about 24,000 homes a year, working with the community energy groups, which gives them an opportunity to create more local jobs and employment, in all around about 130 local jobs created in the last year. Now, at the moment, we've got the local power plan, which is a big commitment from government. It's great. It's really well received around sort of powering up and generation projects, but also the warm homes plan, interlinked with Ofgem's ED3 program for the electricity networks, and how the electricity networks integrate with the community energy sector, and indeed the gas networks as well. So this way of measuring social value that is aligned with the Green Book and the likes of Ofgem, Department for Net Zero, and the Cabinet Office and other lead departments within government is really critical that we get this right now. Thanks, Ben. So with community energy, we can bring more money into the hands of communities. We create new routes for communities to shape local energy, with everything that's going on with flexibility and innovation and local supply, and really work with communities for readiness. So we create these local energy markets that we're also aware of in the community energy sector, and most important, support vulnerable homes and those left behind in the energy transition. Thanks, Ben. So alongside this work, we've been supported by Great British Energy, and they actually gave us a letter of support very early on. And Samantha Kagan from Great British Energy, who leads on the social value and data and analytics, has wanted me to read something out to you all. So Great British Energy understands that local and community energy is the way to show people tangible benefits of the energy transition, and the language and framework of social value is largely how we do that. We support developments being made in this area as social value tools tend to be improved and refined as we interact with them more. We hope that these tools will be accessible by communities and local authorities in a way that is useful, simple, and informative. So we need to make this easy for the sector. And Sam was sorry that she couldn't attend. There's a big meeting today with Great British Energy, which hopefully will help move the local power plan forward. But she was keen that I read that out to you. Now, obviously, we've got Matt Vickers here as well, the new CEO of Community Energy England. And I'm really pleased that Matt has offered to say a few words around this. Obviously, Community Energy England are also leading on the State of the Sector report, which is another form of reporting that we need to align social value with. So, Matt, thanks very much for joining us today. If you want to say a few words.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Ollie. Look, as Ollie said, great to kind of meet some of you virtually. I've probably met a few of you already. I've been in position, 4 weeks now as Chief Exec at Community Energy England. I'm sure all of you know who we are, but we are with the membership body for Community Energy in England. So if you're not a member, please do join, because the more of us there are, the more the stronger we are, and the clearer voice that we can have. Look, as Ollie said, this is such an exciting moment for community energy, between the local power plan, the warm homes plan, all of the opportunities that we've got around clean renewable power, and this moment that we've got right now around international events. It's showing us the importance of local energy, of local advice, of retrofit, of all of the things that we're doing as a movement around embedding community energy at the heart of the energy system. And my background was previously I was the energy ombudsman, and I was also working at NESO, so I was on the exec team at NESO. And one of the things that's taught me is about the importance of being able to tell our story. We know that we've got a great story to tell, but if we're really looking to mainstream and scale community energy, we need to be able to talk the language and be able to show the benefits that where all of this investment is going, so that we can attract both public and private investment. And having that social ROI story is really important. I know from NESO, not every kilowatt is created equal. There are some kilowatts that are more valuable than others, and the kilowatts that we produce as community energy are especially valuable, because what comes with them is that level of engagement, that level of participation in the process of decarbonisation. It does support so many other things that we can do around, not just generation, but things like retrofit and energy advice, again, has a huge value to the communities that we work in and to the country as a whole. So it's so important that we're able to show that kind of business case, that economic case. There are really, really kind of hard-nosed reasons about why we should be backing community energy. And the work that you'll hear the team talk about, over the next 40 minutes or so, it shows just how important that is. If we can build that social ROI story, we've got that full picture of what's the value that we're bringing to the energy system and to the country as a whole. So as Ollie said, at the moment, we've got the state of the sector report out at the moment, where we're asking for your input on that. That's whether you're a member of CE or not. Go on our website and please do submit your entries to that. So important that we can build that picture of all of the data and the full story that we've got. You'll be hearing a bit later about this, some more data that this project is looking for. So we will be coming out and again asking you to help by by putting in data for this. Well aware that for all of us, that does take up time. That can be a burden at a time when we've got so much going on. But I just really encourage you, as you see this over the next 40 minutes or so, why it's so important is building that bottom up, that ground up picture about the importance of community energy and about the impact that we can have. So that was it from me, and I think it's over to the team now to talk you through a bit more detail about what is social ROI and how have we been building it and what's next steps. So thanks for listening, and do get behind this and behind State of the Sector, because they both build up that picture of what's going on.
Brilliant. Thank you both, Ollie and Matt. So with that, we're going to hand it over to Caroline Bird from the University of Bristol, who's going to talk you through the social value of community energy, particularly the policy perspectives. Over to you, Caroline.
Okay, thank you for those introductions, Ollie and Matt. That was really helpful to have a bit of framing and background to what we're doing here. So now what I want to do is a bit more context around the policy and the ways that value can be measured, particularly in relation to community energy. Let me see if I can make this work on the slides. There we go. So I guess we've already talked about some of the key policy areas. The local power plan is maybe the key policy document that we're talking about. And obviously the warm homes plan and ED3 are key areas as well. And really what we want to talk about here is how these link to how energy is procured, how social value and co-benefits are valued, and how that relates to community energy delivery. And something that I particularly like within the local power plan is this diagram, which shows how the different areas interact and really demonstrates how local benefits can be generated through community and local energy approaches. So it talks about the local economic benefits, things like community cohesion, things about local jobs. I think this is a really helpful diagram. And then within the annex of the local power plan, again, there are 3 of these diagrams which talk about how economic and social impacts are generated through community energy, through local authority approaches to energy and shared ownership projects. Again, with the local power plan accelerating some of that, accelerating energy. And actually, interestingly, within the evidence annex, it says, whilst economic benefits is well established, it's not clear yet how we measure social benefits properly. There is evidence it exists, but it's not yet measured. So maybe that's how our research currently feeds in. So thinking a bit more about social value, social return on investment, and the co-benefits of community energy, there was a paper that came out earlier this year by Leighton colleagues, which identified 18 approaches to quantitative assessment and a further 10 taking qualitative and quantitative approaches. So there are lots of approaches and methodologies out there for measuring these co-benefits. And what we're trying to do is work out, which ones are particularly useful and how we might adapt them, if you like, so that they work better for community energy. So where have we got to? I meant to go here next. So social value approaches. What we've done really here is to take a deeper look at different approaches to social value. And I particularly like this diagram from Social Value International, which talks about the 8 principles of social value and very much puts stakeholders, and we mean communities, right at the centre of this. It's so important that we think about what communities need and how we value them properly. So when we took a deeper look at different approaches, what we wanted to do was to see which ones might be most effective for community energy, what value is captured, what data is required, and how much effort they require. And obviously they require different amounts of effort. The social value portal particularly is one that we've looked at, which is used particularly by local authorities, but it does take very much a numerical approach. And that's really about rigor and comparability in procurement. The social value bank is more about well-being, thinking about a person-centered approach. Again, it requires numerical equivalence, but it takes a different approach. Cirio is more strategic and is more data intensive. And the social value engine takes a place-based approach, which considers social value in the context of place and community-wide impacts. So in terms of community energy and UK community energy, there are really 3 pillars of social value. The community benefit that's derived from investments in energy infrastructure is generation and storage. So that's like a monetary value, if you like. The additional social value, which results from things like job creation and local economic development, and the embedded social value that results from energy-related services. And these have oversight and policy from different parts of government. So this next slide really shows some of the government documents, policy areas, and regulations and legislation which drives and underpins these different approaches and different aspects of social value. In the context of community benefit, it's really either monetary or in kind and is about improving the local economy, society and environment. So it comes from different areas. It might come from the commercial development of energy with a benefit fund that delivers lump sums or annual payments to communities. It might come through shared ownership of assets, or it might come from the energy communities themselves. And this might be through subsidies such as feed-in tariffs, although they're more associated now with larger developments. So the numbers that I've got here, they're numbers from industry experts. I mean, clearly they're not gospel, but it gives you an idea of the relative scale of different approaches to energy developments and the relative amounts that they might generate. So the next one is thinking about additional social value, and that's codified through public procurement legislation, particularly through things like the Public Services Social Value Act, the Public Procurement Act. And these require procuring authorities to consider social value outcomes in procurement. So what that means is when you're procuring something, you don't necessarily go for the cheapest option, but you think about what additional things might be generated through procuring in a particular way. So that's very much, for local authorities thinking, can we get community energy to contribute here? How might we procure it? What additional benefits do they generate? And because it's often done by local authorities, it's very much a social value portal, the themes, outcomes and measures, and the way that that's measured. And there are 130 measures contained within the TOMS framework. That's a lot of measures, but each local authority might pick particular ones that they think are relevant. So this honeycomb diagram on the right suggests some particular measures. National TOMS 1, that's about number of local people employed, for example. So there are different measures that generate different outcomes for work, for employment, for environmental benefits, for community benefits such as volunteering. And you might also have additional measures which are about specific community energy KPIs, for example. But they all end up coming back into numerical equivalents. So arguably it might miss some of the more nuanced benefits of community energy. And finally, there's embedded social value. And these are codified in distribution network and gas distribution network rulebooks. And some organizations which provide services to them might undertake calculations like this. The problem is these calculations have huge transaction costs relatively. There's a lot of data curation, there's a lot of management of data sets. So this is quite a difficult approach, but it is very detailed. So what we're really saying is there are different approaches to measuring social value. There are different areas that we can work. But what we also suggest is possibly some of these miss some of the deeper, more intrinsic value of community energy. So what we're really trying to do is think about how does community energy deliver more through different approaches? How do we develop and value this? And I'm going to hand over to Colin to think about, or to talk a bit more about our project and where we're going.
Thank you very much, Caroline. So I'm going to be talking about our project, which is, just make sure I can get the right slide up now, which is the Valuing Community Energy Project. This project is funded by the Energy Demand Research Centre, which is based at University of Birmingham and the University of Sussex. The Energy Demand Research Centre itself is funded by UKRI, so UK Research and Innovation, so the government. And it's a big £15 million research programme over 5 years. And we have received some funding through their flexible fund to undertake this research on valuing community energy. The research team includes me, Caroline, Jake and Ben. So all four of us are presenting here today, except for Jake, who's monitoring the Q&A. And the project itself, Valuing Community Energy, is a 1-year research project to examine what constitutes social value in the community energy sector, how it is captured and amplified, and how existing tools can be adapted to the needs of the sector. So because it's an academic project, we have a theoretical framing, and this is around transaction costs. Now, what is really implied in this context, it is the difference between the effort to capture social value and the benefits of reporting social value. Because we could all imagine a perfect tool to capture all social value, but we would probably spend all our time feeding the data into such a tool to deliver the perfect calculation. So there's this trade-off that we need to work out what it is between the effort to feed in data and the benefits of reporting social value. And yet the benefit of reporting social value, as Caroline mentioned, depends on who you're talking to, right? So in government, we have, broadly speaking, these kind of 3 areas, so one of them is kind of DESNZ space, the other one, so that's the Department of Energy Security Net Zero, the other one is the Cabinet Office and Procurement, and then finally we have Ofgem through ED3 and ED2, right? So these are kind of different parts of government and regulation, which have different ways of valuing outcomes. And community energy spans all these 3 areas. So it's important that we understand how we can provide the relevant data into these different strands of government so that they can recognise the value that community energy generates. So the survey we are launching today is designed to understand the needs of the sector, because we're we have a relatively good understanding of what the needs of these different parts of government are, even though we're still exploring that further in our research as well. We now really want to gain a bottom-up understanding of what the needs of the sector are. So in terms of the overall research project, this is a slightly complicated looking diagram. If you like, it's a theory of change, which I'm sure some of you will have come across. What is highlighted here in red, really, this is what we're talking about today. So this is our overall research project, but today we're talking about the sector-wide survey on value capture and prioritization. And it sits alongside the mapping and assumptions of the different tools to capture social value that Caroline mentioned. For example, the social value portal's national TOMS framework and so on. We have reviewed the national TOMS framework because this has also been used by Community Energy Pathways to evaluate, to do an initial evaluation of community energy, and it has delivered some interesting results, but it was not quite satisfactory in terms of the range of value it was capturing and how it could be presented to different parties. And then, as we can see here, under the box highlighted in red, we have the participant workshop. And this is the one where we hope to then, using the survey results, engage policymakers more in this discussion and try to work out what the best way is for all actors involved to capture the data and to provide it to relevant authorities so that they get a better picture of what community energy is about, and then to support it more appropriately in policy and governance. So we have done an initial piloting with the sector, and this was with the Community Energy Peoples project, which is one of Community Energy Pathways projects. So lots of confusing names and acronyms here. But the important thing is, in this pilot survey that we undertook, we also wanted to get an understanding of what the relationship between effort and benefit is. So we asked the groups involved, there was 11 groups involved. We asked them about the amount of time they spend reporting, because this for us is one of the critical metrics to understand how much effort it is to provide data. And as you know yourself, at this moment in time, we're providing data both for the State of Sector report, and we're asking for more data from you. This is a key issue, and especially for smaller groups who rely on voluntary labour a lot, this can be quite a significant burden. And so we found among these groups, a lot of them are quite nascent, that they spend pretty much on average one day a month reporting, and this can be quite a significant burden for smaller organizations. However, for the larger organizations, they often have quite, we're well aware that they have quite sophisticated data management systems and CRM systems in place, so it's less of a problem for them. But we want to ensure that whatever way that we go forward in measuring social value, that we enable both the sophisticated organizations with many employees, full-time employees, as well as the nascent groups, to be able to feed data without too much effort into whatever tool or system that we decide on moving forward, so that the value that these organizations generate can be captured and presented appropriately to whoever needs to know more about a social value that's being generated. And in terms of the transaction costs, so what we also asked about was effort versus impact and benefit. This goes back to this point that it is the transaction costs which ultimately determine whether or not an organization will be able to or can be bothered to provide the data to capture the social value that the organization is generating. And we found from our initial survey, again among the 11 groups, that they found overall, so we have this plotting on this graph on the right, that for two particular projects that we asked them about, so it's the Community Energy Peoples project, which is the blue dot numbered 1, and then it's the Leaving No One Behind project funded by UK Power Networks in red, that overall we can see that effort outweighed the impact that they thought that their reporting was delivering. And interestingly, it's the Leaving No One Behind is so as it's linked to UKPN, it's linked to ultimately the social return on investment calculations that they base their consumer vulnerability reporting to Ofgem on. So in other words, it is this social return on investment calculation which is considered quite time consuming. So it takes a lot of effort to do them. So we need to work out what kind of tools are more appropriate in this space to ensure that effort does not outweigh impact. Finally, we asked the groups what is important to the groups themselves in terms of value outcomes that they'd like to measure. So in the spidergram, we've displayed the results, and as we can see here, the one at the top got the highest rating, which is climate change. So climate change was the forefront of the 11 community energy groups that we surveyed. But interestingly, it's at the bottom we have financial outcomes, and the bottom left we have well-being outcomes. So these are the two other priority areas that these organizations would like to be able to report their organizational output on. And so financial includes sharing profits with members, for example, and saving people money. And well-being outcomes is, for example, creating community connections and improving people's health. Now, in terms of financial outcomes, there are metrics out there which have been developed over time. They certainly have their uses. In terms of well-being outcomes, this is still a bit more vague, and this is also something that DESNZ is actually currently working on. They're trying to work out whether they've commissioned some work to create a better understanding whether we can place a value on creating community connections and improving people's health. But this will be ongoing work, and the more data we have also provided by the community energy sector itself, the better our understanding of these links, which sometimes can seem quite tenuous, but it's very important that we build them, because ultimately there's value, of course, as we all know, in a warm and cozy home, but it's difficult to monetize that and to understand the link between the community energy sector and the work that you do as organizations and these kind of outcomes. So now I'm going to just mention quickly ensuring impact, as I'm sure you're, well, as has been mentioned already today, the State of the Sector report and the current policy landscape around local power plan, Warms Home Plan and ED3. This is the framework in which we're undertaking this research to ensure that these policies, especially moving forward, can value the role that community energy plays, and that funding can be allocated accordingly, because everybody in the current policy landscape in government can agree that community energy has an important role to play, but they don't know how to value that in their conventional in their conventional understanding of policy making. So it's very important that we can feed into that. And now finally, I'm going to move on to our survey. So our social survey, as mentioned, has been piloted among community energy people members. This is also to ensure that it's not too long, it's not too onerous to fill out, because we want to ensure that we get as many responses as possible. Key really is that we are asking you to please only provide one response per organisation. That's really important, because we'd like to have an overview of all the organisations and not, well, hopefully not have too much duplication. It's not the end of the world if there's some duplication in the data, but overall we would like to have one per organisation. And then we'd also like to you to complete the survey if possible, because the more complete surveys we have, obviously, the better the data to analyze. So in total, the survey it includes 22 questions. Section 1, so it starts with an introduction into what the survey is about. Then we have a section where we gather anonymized data on your organization. So this anonymized data includes data on where you're based, what your income is over the financial year, how many full-time equivalent jobs your organization employed over the last year, and in which your organization was established. Now, these are all multiple choice questions. This is to ensure anonymity and also ease of analysis. So that means you will fall into a particular bucket, if you like, within each question. Then we ask further ranking questions, one on organizational priorities, such as renewable energy generation, energy advice, and one regarding main sources of income and funding, such as feed-in tariffs and local authority grants. This again will help us paint a picture in terms of what your organization does, and that then allows us also to kind of match the social value or your interest, your particular interest in social value, how you gather data and so on, which is captured in the final part of our survey. So this enables, if you like, cross-referencing from what kind of organization you lead and the kind of social value that you value and how you capture data. So this final section, as I mentioned, is itself about understanding and measuring your organization's social impact. So it refers to the kind of data that your organizations are gathering or not, whom you report to, but also it's about questions about what kind of data you would prefer to gather, and ideally what kind of social value you would like to report. So this is then also to feed upwards, if you like, to DESNZ and Ofgem, to see whether there's any way that this kind of data that is missed, that Caroline alluded to, could somehow be captured in different ways, not necessarily by metrics and so on, but whether there's maybe even alternative approaches to capturing such data and feeding it upwards to policymakers and so on. And so that is now to conclude my presentation, and we're going to now move on to Q&As. So I'm going to hand over to Ben. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, Colin and Caroline. Just a reminder, the Q&A is still open, so if you'd like to add anything in there, please do. I'm going to start with a question from Dara Casey, who is joining us from West Sussex County Council. They write, the Climate Change Committee has recently released supplementary analysis indicating that for every pound spent on net zero, the benefits outweigh this by 2.2 to 4 times. It would be great to be able to evidence the additional benefits of that pound spent with and through community energy. Is this envisaged?
I think this is for me. This is so we actually have one question on this specifically. I'm just going to get the survey up and see. We have one question which is actually quite specialized, and in our piloting run, we didn't have many people that were able to answer this question. But we do ask, question 15 asks specifically if tools are used. So, for example, the Social Value Portal's National TOMS framework. Do you have a return on investment figure you can provide for the activities of your organisation? For example, £1.5 million of community energy fund provided by the Southwest Net Zero Hub was used to raise a total of 54 million in investment by community energy, a ratio of 36 to 1. Okay, so we're very mindful that these ratios carry a lot of value in policy making. So ultimately, we would be able to we hope to be able to provide a ratio of what the sector delivers in terms of return on investment. So how much bang do you get for your buck in the community energy sector? So yes, great question. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. And then the next question we have in the chat is from Michaela Basford from the West of England Combined Authority. We give grants and look at loan financing. Keen to know what questions we should be writing into the application and monitoring process so they are meaningful and not just finger in the air estimates, but equally not so burdensome.
So that is for me again. Just have to quickly read through that again. That's a good question. So I'm not sure I understand that 100% into the application and monitoring process. Because I'm not quite sure whether I can answer that question, because the survey is specifically for community energy organizations to fill out. So maybe this is a separate discussion to be had, given that you are a grant awarding body. So this is this is a discussion that we need to have moving forward. Once we have the surveys from once we have the answers from the survey, then maybe we need to start a discussion with the combined authorities, and especially those that are grant awarding and the net zero hubs in exactly around this point. So what kind of monitoring requirements would be useful versus those that are burdensome for the sector to ensure that social value can be appropriately captured? So yes, we will be in touch. Thanks for this question.
Perfect. And then I think a similar follow-up from Michaela, the previous question actually. So mainly covering solar, wind and capacity building projects. What are the three key questions we should be asking in the evaluation that will best demonstrate the social value of our support to the sector? I think in many ways that's what we're hoping to answer with this, because what we're hoping to do is provide a line where community energy groups actually have the capacity to say what they would like to see more of in reporting rather than a top-down approach. So hopefully that will be clear in our results from this survey and our analysis. That's all the questions we have in the Q&A at the moment. So if anybody does have anything burning, they can raise their hands and I can give them microphone and camera access. If not, Kevin's put something up. I can do that now for you. Give me a second. I think this should work. Give me a second. Allow microphone. There you go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, it did work then. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I can't use the chat.
Okay.
It's not working for me, and also, and I can't see the Q&A. So yeah, sorry about that. But I've designed I can think of at least 2 surveys in the past aimed at community energy organizations. And one of the issues that I've grappled with a lot, with colleagues is, well, what counts as a community energy organization? And I'm just wondering, how you've dealt with that in the context of this survey. Have you provided a definition, and what sort of definition have you provided? Because that could affect what you learn, obviously. Thank you.
Shall I try to answer this? We haven't actually factored that in. It is a good question. We just kind of assumed that by posting this webinar through community energy channels, we would mainly reach the community energy sector. Also, because there is a lack of definition, however, we should probably mention, GBE is looking at defining community energy. And at European level, there are 2 definitions by the European Commission, which is one about renewable energy communities and one is about citizen energy communities, which have had an influence at European level. Now, of course, we're no longer in the EU, but
That's right.
There is, in terms of funding, for example, if the community energy sector in the UK wants to benefit from Horizon funding, and which is £95 billion over 7 years, and the next funding framework coming forward by the European Commission, which might be around twice that, 180 billion over 7 years, then the community energy sector in the UK will need to align its definition, at least, with that of the European Commission. So there's certain benefits in looking towards your neighbours in terms of how they have defined it, but there's also some specificities about the UK that we should probably mention. So especially in Scotland, with the development trusts that play such a significant role in the development of wind projects, right? The ownership of wind farms even, which are not used south of the border because of a different legal framework. So there are some particularities in the UK that we should probably be aware of, but this survey, we have not specified that because also we wanted to keep the introduction as brief as possible, really, and not overload with definitional complexity.
Fantastic. Yeah, because I just think that my concern is that there are lots of organizations that I would consider community energy organizations, but they're not necessarily generating community energy, if you see what I mean. So yeah, that's great. Thanks, Colin.
Thank you. If we go to Tamsin's question in the chat and then Ruth and then Ollie, if that's okay. So Tamsin in the Q&A has asked if you're mapping work of the types of metrics available to the general public, I'm keen to understand what methodologies can be reproduced and are open source for community energy and local authorities developing projects, but unsure where to start with simpler calculations. And that's probably Caroline. You're probably the best place for that question, I think.
Let me just go and find the question. Actually, it might be useful so I can see what it says.
Yeah, it's Tamsin's on in the Q&A.
Yeah, I see that. So yes, I guess we are. I mean, what we're trying to do is look at what already exists and then what's valuable to community energy groups and how we can bring these together in ways that are accessible and relatively straightforward. So yes, looking at what might be open source and what methodologies are out there. Yeah, I mean, does that kind of answer the question? Because that's very much what we're trying to do. Like I said in the presentation earlier on, they exist, but some of them are quite complex. So we want to work out how we can simplify some of them to something that's accessible and actually valuable and useful as well.
Can I just add to that? So because we're publicly funded, as in Caroline, Jake, me, and Ben to a certain extent through EDRC funding, we will make all our research findings publicly accessible. However, some of these tools that are currently being used by the various organizations to capture social value, like the DNO rulebook, that is actually not publicly available. So there's some calculations that happen, if you like, within a black box, kind of between, in this case, between the regulator and the distribution networks. This is a shame. We believe certainly more transparency would benefit everyone. And we are working with the different organizations in this space to understand how transparency could be increased. But we have to see how the different entities respond to our suggestions, and we can't make any promises. But it's certainly something that we're working on, and we would like to most certainly, moving forward, be able to. We would need more funding for this. We don't have enough funding within this research project, but understand or possibly even be involved in the development of a tool. Now, we don't want to create another social return on investment framework or social value tool. There's plenty of them, but some kind of interface which would allow community energy organizations to feed their data into, and it would then translate it upwards into whatever kind of segment of government would find it most useful, whether this is Ofgem, Cabinet Office, or DESNZ/GB Energy.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Colin and Caroline, and thank you, Tamsin, for the question. If we go to Ruth now, I noticed you got your hand up as well as the Q&A, so I've turned on your mic and camera, so you should be able to ask a question if you'd like, or I can read it out for you.
Hi, yeah. Yeah, I think my question actually is a little bit similar to the one before, but I'm just really keen to understand a bit more about like what you're going to create, because like we've just I work for Repowering London, and we support energy co-ops to develop in London, and we're also developing like quite a big community heat network project in Newham, and we've got quite a lot of National Lottery funding to do that, and as part of that we've developed an evaluation framework, but we found it really challenging, partly just knowing what to include, and we are working with UEL. I think it's interesting what you were saying about the value versus the resource that it takes to do it, and like we're finding it's taking a lot of resource and it's quite challenging to do, and I just wondered, yeah, what tools you might or frameworks you might be creating that share best practice, or whether you might even create kind of surveys that people can take questions from, or is that something that I'd be interested to know like what's the extent of what you're creating for sharing.
I mean, this is really interesting to hear the work that's going on. So also part of the reason of why we're running this survey is to understand this kind of work that is already happening within the sector, to avoid too much duplication, because we're already aware that some organizations have done some really quite sophisticated work on SRI calculations, like South East London Community Energy, for example. Now it's really interesting to hear Repowering London. We've also heard from Welsh groups that have undertaken SRI calculations, quite sophisticated ones. So we are aware that there's all these pockets already happening within the sector, and there's lots of duplication, and it's what we really hope to get to at some point is to provide some kind of interface to avoid such duplication. Yeah, the problem is the only method at the moment is really survey form, and that's a shame, because that just is yet another burden on the sector, and we don't really want to have we don't want to have that really more burdening. But if there's some kind of way that, for example, the reporting that is done in-house within groups could automatically feed into a database, and that database could then be annually, quarterly, whatever, uploaded into some interface, and then some value could be, whatever it is, spat out. You know, it could be like this return on investment figure that, you know, the organization has received X amount of funding from these sources, and the value that you have generated of interest to procurers is X, and to Ofgem is Y, or something like that. That would be like, in simplistic terms, that would be for us a pretty good outcome, we believe. But of course, the survey might reveal some other requirements of the sector that we're not aware of yet.
Yeah, like for us, like we're trying to evaluate, but I think we've come to the conclusion that the social return on investment is like much too challenging for us to actually like be able to do effectively. So
yeah, they're very sophisticated or very complicated, and they're more appropriate for bigger organizations. So there's a reason, I think, why this DNO rulebook is between Ofgem and the district network operators, because it's for huge organizations like a DNO to work out what their social return on investment is, not the responsibility of a community energy organization to feed that data upwards. So like our argument here would be that if this is something that Ofgem really values, they would need to provide the interface and the resources for the ultimate providers of consumer vulnerability alleviation work. So community energy organizations, whoever it is, that they should provide them with the resources to provide the data, really.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if we go to Ollie, and then we'll go to Ali's question in the Q&A.
Thanks. It's just an evaluation. It's just one of our insights. It's so originally, you know, we started this work about 2 years ago because of a lottery project and trying to assess the co-benefits, and that it kind of answers these questions a little bit, because we were looking at measuring, you know, the economic value of jobs, environment, well-being, kilowatts, carbon, and what have you, you know, the whole array, to give it an economic value, so that we could play that back almost to the local authorities and say, in this local authority area, all the community energy groups are working, and this is the annual economic value that they're creating on top of the work they already do, which is kind of captured in the state of the sector. And this is the point, one of the points as well, that should be really helpful for them when they're going back within procurement and the Treasury to get to justify grants and also other funding, and to be able to feed back to the Treasury. So, you know, jobs, environment, well-being, kilowatts and carbon. I think Caroline outlined that sort of, it was kind of like a spider web. But yeah, really interesting. And just to the point of the state of the sector, for Kevin, is a perfect element for his groups to access and give, you know, that sort of feedback on social value and what you're doing. We have 600 groups in the UK now who work through all the member organisations, Community Energy England, Scotland and Wales. So hopefully this will make the outputs of this will find a mechanism to link in with the state of the sector and make sort of social value reporting easier and give those economic values. But yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Ollie. I think we probably have time for one last question, so I'll go to Ali's question in the chat. Ali is asking, what are the appropriate boundaries or scope when measuring the social value of community energy projects? For example, improved home warmth may lead to better health outcomes and reduce pressure on public health services. Where should community energy organisations reasonably draw the line in terms of what they report on, so as not to overextend their evaluation efforts? And then there is a follow-up question, if we take that one first.
Yeah, I think this is like key to really what we're trying to understand, is this transaction cost question, right? So how much data can we expect an organization to provide to ultimately capture the social value that they're generating? there is a kind of a nudge, if you like, from government. In an ideal world, they would like to understand what, for example, the health outcome of a warmer home is, and how much saving that would deliver to the NHS, for example, or to, well, I mean, even to, say, a local hospital, to A&E, or to a GP, because of fewer visits. But that is a stretch too far, we believe, at this stage. Better data would need to be provided by by a very wide range of organisations before community energy, the sector as such, will be in a position to provide its data to then create causation, like a causal link in that space. So we're certainly not there yet. So that's why, like, the boundary at the moment is smaller, if you like. So it's not as ambitious as that, but there is an understanding and a desire to move in that direction eventually. Hopefully, if data capturing infrastructures can become simpler.
Brilliant. And then a brief follow-up question, which is how to approach the aspects of social value that are difficult to quantify. I think, as we've come across, how can we reflect these impacts without oversimplifying or distorting them through monetisation? And I think the important question here is, how can policymakers be persuaded to act on qualitative evidence?
Yeah, that is the big question. So Caroline and I, we've worked on another project where we've grappled with this question. Basically, the problem is, because ultimately the decision making in terms of government spending lies with the Treasury, and their decision making Bible is the Green Book. It's the Treasury Green Book, and that is a way of evaluating policies, right? It is essentially establishes how cost-benefit analysis are undertaken. Now, there is, within the Green Book, there is kind of a nudge towards socially valuable outcomes. But ultimately, it is the language of the Green Book that also the sector needs to speak to create visibility within the Treasury, and also to garner support for policies. So the local power plant, for example, will be evaluated using the Treasury Green Book. So that's why it is essential, effectively, to have these quantified outcomes. But yes, at some point, probably this is a greater societal debate to be had, is in terms of how to value the actual more qualitative outcomes that the sector delivers and other sectors deliver. But yeah, that's a big question.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to everybody who submitted a question, and thank you very much to everybody who answered. I'm just going to finish off today's presentation. I'm just going to take control of the PowerPoint. If we didn't get a chance to answer your questions, then we will take them into account within the report. It's all been very informative, so thank you very much for that. And where possible, we can try and follow up with people that ask the questions. So finally, it's really over to you. We've outlined our project and why we're doing it. What we need now is your help. Using either this link or the QR code that's attached here, you can access the survey, which we are hoping to, which we will be sharing with the rest of the sector. As Colin mentioned, we're asking for one response per organisation. So please do, wherever possible, collaborate within each organisation and come up with a detailed response where possible. And the survey will stay live until just before midnight on Sunday, the 24th of May. So we've got a month now to collect responses. We'd also really like you, wherever possible, to share this with your networks, to any community energy organisations who are not here today, really to cast as wide a net as possible. The link is also in the chat if you need it. And if there are any questions related to the survey, my email is attached to the introduction, so you can pop me a message and I will pass it on to our research team. With that, all that's left to do is to say a massive thank you to everybody today who attended, and our speakers, Matthew, Ollie, Colin and Caroline. Again, thank you very much for taking part, and we really look forward to reviewing and getting into the nitty-gritty of your responses. Have a lovely day, everybody. Take care.